Welcome to the Creative Me podcast, coming to you from Guernsey in the Channel Islands. This is episode 39, Dealing with Criticism with Nadia Seaver. Hello and welcome to episode 39 of the Creative Me podcast. Today we're doing something a little bit different. I had a chat on Skype with one of my lovely online friends, Nadia Seaver, about a really interesting topic, and we thought we'd let you be a fly on the wall for our discussion. Let me tell you about Nadia a bit first. She runs a lifestyle blog and podcast about gardening, craft and creativity. Two of those are actually my very favourite things, craft and creativity. And gardening, well, you know what? I'm trying really hard to make that a favourite of mine too. This summer is my year of the garden, or my summer of the garden. So watch this space for occasional gardening updates. Nadia and I met in various Facebook groups and got chatting about blogging and podcasting, and actually she was one of my customers for my blog feedback package that I offer, and I'll make sure I link to that in the show notes. She was really pleased with some of the feedback that I gave her on her lovely blog. How this episode's come about is that Nadia dropped me an email and said, "Oh, I've got an idea for a blog or podcast episode for you. What about taking on the topic of criticism, and particularly criticism online?" And I was like, oh, wow, that is a big topic. And cheekily, I sort of bounced it back to her a little bit and said, well, what do you think about the topic? And she had some really interesting thoughts. And I thought, well, why don't I get her on the show and we'll have a very informal, unstructured chat about the topic and see where it takes us. And that's exactly what we did. I see this episode as very much the start of a conversation about online criticism. And what I'd really like to encourage you to do is, if you're not already a member of the Lightbulb Club, my private Facebook group, hop in and join us, and I'll start another conversation in there so we can really dig into this idea of how to deal with criticism. If you want to join the Lightbulb Club, just go to thelightbulb.club and you will be redirected to the relevant Facebook group page. It's a closed group, so you will have to ask to join, but I will do my very best to accept you within 24 hours. So as I said, this is an unstructured chat. We had a few talking points, but that's about it, and it is the start of a conversation. Nadia's got some great things to say, so I really hope that you enjoy this. Here we go. Should we start by talking about the idea of unsolicited feedback? What's your experience of that?
Oh, it's happens these days whether you want it to or not, because as soon as you make something or create something and you put it online, people have opinions on it. It's like you no longer own what you've made. And unsolicited feedback can be good. Maybe they'll see a point of view that you hadn't before, and you might get directions off in a new line, or sometimes it can make you feel a lot worse. And if you're not in a good place to start with, it can spiral you into kind of unproductivity as well.
Definitely.
Being unproductive.
It can be very destructive. And I think with creative products and services, it's particularly tricky because a creative creation, that sounds weird, a creative creation, a person's opinion on that is very subjective, isn't it? Particularly if you make art or something like that.
Yeah, it what you like isn't maybe another person's cup of tea. Like personally, I've been quite open recently about being in quite a negative place and being overwhelmed by the response from social media, and it can really throw you off your game. which obviously as a creative business you don't want to do, because you want to be productive, because ultimately you'd like to sell your product online and move on to the next one. So learning how to deal with that, I think, has been an uphill struggle. It's kind of, yeah, it's difficult.
You're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, aren't you? Because in order to grow your online business, you need to be on social media a lot and, promoting yourself. But by being on social media a lot, you're exposing yourself to this unsolicited feedback. So it's hard to get the balance right, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if you take a step back sometimes and almost kind of ask yourself, well, number one, is this person my target market? Is this person the type of person that I want to sell to? And then if it is, well, then is is it actually creative, or is it destructive? Like, is it actually going to help you, or is it something that you just go, no, this isn't in line with my branding or my mission statement or what I want to do? And I know for me that it's been kind of difficult because I just kind of recoil altogether, which is completely the wrong way to deal with it, because I think once you're online and you put something out there, you need to have a little bit of a backbone and go, no, this is me, and I'm okay and I'm comfortable in the skin that I'm in and what I'm making, and that's okay. So when someone comes along and says, I don't like your product, or I don't like how you dealt with this, then you kind of need to go, right, well, where is it coming from?
I think that's such a good point. You said such a load of good things there. The first thing that I want to pick up on is the idea of target market. And if someone's giving you feedback and they are not your target market, then I think a good strategy is actually just to disregard it. And I know that sounds a bit harsh, but if they are not the person you want to be your customer, and there is all of this feedback from lots of other people already, then in terms of prioritization, they can go right to the back of the queue, quite frankly. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, thanks, okay, cheerio. Because they're not your tribe, they're not your people. And it's your people that you want to have a dialogue with about your products and services and that sort of thing. So a really good point that you've made there, that think about, is this person my target customer, target audience? So spot on, I think. It's sometimes easier said than done, all of this, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I like that you said, if you're putting yourself out there, you need to kind of get a bit of a backbone. And I agree with you. You've got to develop a thicker skin. Everyone has. But ultimately, everything you put out there is your baby, you kind of, there's an emotional involvement there, and it's hard. Talk to me more about constructive and destructive criticism.
Like destructive criticism is obviously just the type of criticism you don't want. It's not from a good place. It may not be from your target market, and it's ultimately just there to kind of tear you down. Whereas constructive criticism you can kind of build on. It's more of a feedback. And I know there's arguments out there about any type of criticism being good, but sometimes I think constructive criticism can really help you grow, especially if you're in a good place to take it on board. Maybe it can help you develop a different line. Maybe it can help you see something from a different point of view. And if it's from a good place where someone is actually trying to help you, then I think it can really help your business grow. Maybe it's a whole other idea you never even thought of.
That's a really good point. I mean, it's still tough to handle if you haven't asked for the feedback, though, is it?
Yeah,
it
really is.
Yeah, if you've not put yourself out there and said, right, okay, I'm thinking of this new thing. Can I have everyone's thoughts? If you say that and then the floodgates open, well, that is easier to handle. And I think that's why that, whether it's solicited or not, is quite an important point. I don't know if you know this, but I come from a teaching background, and we don't use the word criticism in teaching. We very much say feedback. And I think, is there a difference between the two? What do you think?
Again, that's something I've been reading a lot lately. The idea of criticism, it's inherently negative.
Yes.
Whereas with feedback, it's almost, it comes from a more positive, a better place where someone is kind of more open to receiving it. Whereas with criticism, it's there to kind of tear you down almost, and you get instantly defensive about it. Or at least I feel that way. Whereas with feedback, I think it's almost you want to build on what people are talking to you. It seems more like an open conversation, really.
Yeah, it's more of a two-way thing. In a feedback situation, you feel you can ask more questions and delve into the feedback more.
Yeah, and it's again getting back to your unsolicited feedback. It's even feedback. Sometimes it can be from maybe a friend or someone who's quite close, and they don't really think about it before they kind of give you feedback because they'd be like they would be trying to help you succeed, and they think that their feedback will actually help you, whereas in fact you may not be in the right place to receive that.
Absolutely. So. And sometimes it's even more difficult to take from somebody who's close to you, don't you find?
Exactly, definitely. Yeah. I definitely agree with that.
I've certainly experienced that, and often I'm just recalling a few situations where that's happened, and the person who's given that unsolicited feedback, that close person, doesn't actually know a great deal about what they're giving feedback on. So that's been very frustrating because they're giving feedback and they don't know the history of something and they don't know the details, and it's like, okay, right, this is awkward because you're my friend, and do you know what I mean? Very difficult. On the feedback word, I do like the word feedback over criticism. I think that's because I'm generally a positive person. I think you're right when you say criticism is inherently negative and feedback is a positive thing. In teaching, we always use phrases like, if you were to do this again, what might you do differently? And I like what you did here. Perhaps here's an area for development, and then sort of finish on a high point. The classic feedback sandwich. Have you come across that?
Yes.
Every management course I've ever done, the classic feedback sandwich. But for those who've not heard of it, when you're giving feedback, you start with something positive, then the areas for development in the middle, and then end on a positive note. See, I can't even bring myself to say criticism. I have to say areas for development. That's a proper teachery thing, isn't it? Proper teachery thing. What about something when we were kind of prepping for this episode? If you are finding it hard to deal with feedback or criticism, what about, I like how you, in our notes that we prepared, you called it business buddies or accountability partnerships. What's your experience of that?
They're amazing and everyone should have one.
Tell me more.
So I remember in one of your podcasts, I can't remember which one, but you were talking about business buddies, and that's something that I found that has helped me greatly. I have two business buddies, one who is a relatively new designer, so we were able to kind of grow because our areas are kind of the same. It's like a Venn diagram. We have an area where it overlaps and an area where it's different, and she's just been an amazing sounding board. So when I'm feeling down or where she's feeling down, I guess we can talk about it and be quite, because we're outside of each other's lives and situations, that you can kind of have a kind of frank discussion, and it's quite open. And that's fantastic because sometimes when you get negative feedback, you can kind of spiral downward, or at least I know I can recoil and then I stop writing, or podcasting becomes more difficult, especially, you're trying to be as open as possible, but still have a sense of self that's private. And then I have found that sometimes, and someone else mentioned this to me as well, that the criticism or feedback that hurts the most is the one that you kind of already knew about yourself. Whereas a business buddy, they're fantastic to kind of get your head back in the game, talk something out, help realize where that came from, and then help you build on that experience. And I know in certain cases myself, I've gone back to her and gone kind of, okay, this person said these things, and where I would have taken, I would have been kind of looking at it from a real kind of, oh, they just really don't like what I do. And she would be kind of more kind of like, well, that's not actually what they're saying if you look at it from this point of view. And yeah, I think having that backup and second pair of eyes, especially if if you work from home or if you're a solo entrepreneur or anything like that, it's very difficult and isolating. And sometimes, those comments and social media is what keeps you going sometimes, because you're on your own. Whereas a business buddy, they pick you right back up and they help you get your head back in the game and help you realize what's actually occurring and help bring down the drama levels as well.
Oh, that's so true. That's so true. You're absolutely right. I'll make sure I put a link in the show notes to my podcast that I did about accountability partnerships, because, we covered a little bit of that in the show, I think. And you're absolutely right. I have an accountability partner and she does exactly that for me. She removes the drama. I'm going to have to put that on my wall somewhere. Remove the drama. Because sometimes that's exactly what you need to do. And they give you like a sort of not an external view on a situation, but a slightly like a step back from the emotional bit. That's what a good accountability buddy does, I think. And the other thing I was going to say is, certainly in my accountability relationship, there's a degree of kind of coaching that goes on. Mm-hmm. So that it's not necessarily solution finding and just brushing things under the carpet and not kind of delving into things deeply. It's much more coaching orientated. So if I need a bit of G'ing up, she'll give that to me and vice versa. Is that kind of how your partnership works?
Yeah, definitely. The courage to kind of take the next step has only happened because I'll go, well, what do you think about this? And then she'll get really excited about it and then just tell me to go do it. So definitely. Whereas I'd be more hesitant and kind of think about things. She would get a little bit excited about it if it was really a good idea. So definitely, accountability buddies are the way forward.
Yeah, I second that. And actually, in relation to sort of dealing with criticism, I would always prefer to go to my accountability partner first for feedback than anybody else. I'd go to her first. And because that's why she's my accountability buddy, because I value her feedback. What about you?
Yeah, it's we've got a friendly term that we use kind of both with myself and my husband and people I work with, and it's called idiot filter.
Yeah.
And I actually couldn't try to phrase that better if I wanted, because it really is like sometimes you need an idiot filter, and accountability buddies are fantastic for that. Yes. And they know you and they know where stuff is coming from, but then they can also see the outside view looking at your work, which is fantastic, because you may mean something, but it can come across as something completely differently.
Excellent. Yeah, definitely that. So if you don't have an accountability partner, you need to get one. I think the other area you can have, if you don't have like a partnership, just two of you, then perhaps a closed Facebook group. I mean, obviously I've got the Light Bulb Club, and there are some other really great closed Facebook groups out there. But if you can get in one where it's your people, your tribe, then receiving feedback in that environment generally is pretty good, isn't it? That's certainly my experience.
That's definitely been my experience. I'm a member of a few closed groups on Facebook, and they have been absolutely fantastic. They are just your Light Bulb Club and Joe's business group and I think Jolie Creates as well. Yeah. They all have something different. They kind of overlap on some topics, but there's generally someone in each one of those groups that I'm part of that can help you when you're feeling down, or you need feedback in a certain area that you might be weaker about, or maybe it's social media, maybe it's Pinterest, maybe it's graphics, maybe it's just general business help. But definitely being part of those closed groups, because you can ask privately, and then it can sometimes spur a discussion on a topic and highlight a problem for someone else that may need that help as well.
Definitely, and that's where a group almost has something over an accountability partnership, because you've got that slightly wider network. That's a top tip for anybody who is perhaps working solo from home and needs a bit of community, but also someone who wants feedback in a reasonably safe environment. Go for a Facebook group that's not massive, quite small, quite niche, and is your your people, is the sort of people that you want to be talking to. So I'll make sure those couple of groups that you mentioned, I'll make sure there's links in the show notes to those, definitely. So let's think a bit about strategies for dealing with criticism. I guess this kind of makes me reflect on a few experiences I've had of perhaps unpleasant emails, or, you know, we've all had them, or comments on Facebook or whatever. They do happen, and actually the more successful you get, the more often it's going to happen, which is tough, but it is a fact. What's the best way to deal with this type of criticism? What do you think, Nadia?
It kind of depends on, okay, well, what forum is it? Like, is it on Twitter? Is it Facebook? Is it like a Ravelry group, or is it email? Because you can kind of go more into depth on email as well.
Yes.
And whereas with Twitter, and I find generally if something is over Twitter, the response time tends to come into play.
Yes.
Because generally on Twitter, it's a fast turnover time. So generally recognizing that there's an issue instantly can give you more time to deal with it.
Yes.
So I definitely think that's an issue. Especially Facebook, you've got a little bit more time. You can post, acknowledge it, and then move it privately if that's an issue. But I do think that if it's public to begin with, resolving it in the public space, especially if you can do it in an amicable way, is good, because then other people get a sense of what you're about, and that you know, you care about what people think about your product or your brand. So I think that can be a good one. If it's something that definitely needs like a more meaty response, moving it to an email platform, like, you know, can you DM me your Gmail, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I do think it's a good idea, especially if it's really nasty feedback, that sometimes stepping back and not getting down to that level, but just kind of stepping back and going, thank you. Even if it's something that you absolutely hate and it was a horrible, horrible, nasty thing, just say thank you for your response, and kind of leave it at that, and don't get drawn into it. If it's the worst thing that you can do for a business is to get drawn into a long online negative thing, because they agree. Don't die.
No. If it's online, it's there forever. I've used that strategy before, actually, and in an email situation. I've not been drawn, and I've just gone back and I've said, thank you so much for your email. Your feedback is really appreciated. Have a lovely day. Kind regards. You know? And I didn't hear back, strangely enough. But that's a good strategy. I like that. What else? Have you got any other thoughts on that?
Again, it's kind of more stepping back and seeing where it's coming from. Like, definitely, if it's from your target market, you want to resolve that to the best of your ability. So, you know, you can also go over the top on this as well. So kind of drawing a line to begin with, like, how bad is it? Is it really going to affect other sales, other customers? Is it personal? Because if it's personal, then it's not your business and it's not your brand, so you would deal with that slightly differently. And again, if it's on a business account rather than a private account, I would again step back and go, well, I think that we need to take this more into a private setting. It's kind of it's a very tough one.
It's hard, definitely.
It is. It's definitely hard.
If you're having difficulties on a social media platform, and it's kind of the more sort of personal criticism that you alluded to just before, it's worth mentioning that on Facebook and Twitter and in other areas, there is like usually a block or report type function. You know, and if you feel you have to use that facility, you should go ahead and use it. I mean, I've blocked people on Twitter before because I just, you know, I don't have time for certain things. So it's worth mentioning that that's often available, particularly also in a forum type environment. There are usually some ground rules established in the forum, and in all good forums, and actually Facebook groups for that matter, I'd like to see a ground rule that states, you know, be nice to one another, be supportive. You know, I wish that went without saying, but it doesn't.
No, I think especially when it comes to creative issues, like i- if you're in the creative industry, people have such strong feelings about certain things that they often don't really take into account that you created this. They're
Mm.
seeing it from their personal point of view. And that in itself, you're never going to change their mind. So you can just, you're not going to win to begin with. So it's easier to kind of just step back and go, okay, thank you. I didn't see it from that point of view. Or, I have seen some terrible things where people aren't even discussing the same issue. They're both seeing it from two completely different things, whereas it sometimes a mediator, especially in forums and stuff like that, can help. So yeah, if you do run your own group, definitely have a moderator who can step in and be someone completely different. That can sometimes help as well.
Definitely. Oh, there's loads of for such a it's quite a negative topic, but what we've got there is a load of sort of positive takeaways. I think that the biggest thing that I'm getting from this discussion is if the person giving the criticism is not in your tribe or your people, then just step away.
Hmm.
I think that's a massive takeaway. Oh, some good stuff here, Nadia. Thank you. Well, I'm just thinking, is there anything else that you'd like to cover in this discussion? Because we could go on for days, to be fair.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I think the only tagline that I've really liked recently when I've been reading around the topic is that you're not responsible for anyone's actions expressed online or otherwise, but you're responsible for your own.
oh, yes.
And that's one that I kind of actually printed out and I just tagged it on the corkboard above my desktop because, yeah, you never know what's going to happen when you press send sometimes. So it's nice to kind of just step back and go, well, I'm just going to continue being me. And if you want that space to be fun and creative and nice, then it's up to you to build that and make it that way.
That's excellent. You're not responsible for anyone's actions expressed online or otherwise, but you are responsible for your own. Yeah, that's a really important statement. And actually, going back to kind of a teaching kind of environment, when I teach about behaviour management, because that's one of my favourite modules to teach. Incidentally, I teach teachers in my day job and we do a bit on behaviour management and it's great fun. But we talk about the only person's behaviour who you can control is your own. So, if you have a kind of behaviour management issue in a classroom, you can help manage the behaviour, but you can't control it. You can only control your behaviour. And that's a very, very similar sentiment, that it is all about you, and you need to be the person kind of making the decisions and so on. So it's very valuable. Nadia, amazing. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you for a great chat. I hope that the listeners have taken something from that. I mean, we deliberately kept the format loose and conversational because we just wanted to see what came up. So it'd be great to get some feedback. Some feedback. Feel free to use the feedback sandwich technique with us in the comments under this episode. That would be great. So Nadia, where can people find you online?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram as Cottage Notebook. I'm on Ravelry as Bunny Tea. My website is cottagenotebook.ie and the podcast is the CLM podcast from the Cottage Notebook.
Amazing. I'll make sure there's links in the show notes to all of those. And I really highly recommend people check you out online. And in particular, if they want to hear your dulcet tones more, which they should, to listen to your podcast because it's fantastic. So thank you ever so much for coming on the show, Nadia. You're very welcome back anytime.
And thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I hope everyone enjoyed listening to you.